as you stated in your like Reddit post, like you're going back 3 generations in your family. You've been like you've been working with NASA, and like you're an engineer for them. But like most people only get to see this kind of stuff off like television or maybe like back in the day on the news. Like, can you explain to me like how does it feel like being your life, and like how did that basically, let's just say, the family motto?
Well, it's really interesting because there was a time in my life, especially when I was in college, that I didn't want to work for NASA because my dad worked for NASA and my grandfather was an engineer for Thiokol back in the day. He wasn't nearly as much into NASA because he decided he was an engineer for a while, and then he decided to be a lawyer, and he became a successful lawyer. Interesting because like my mother's father was an engineer. He was a captain in the JAG. And then he was an engineer after that, and then he went back to being a lawyer, and he stuck with that for the rest of his career. But his connections allowed my father to start working for Morton Thiokol in the mid '80s, which is really how I kind of got into how he got into human space flight, and then I got into human space flight. But interestingly enough, our family goes back even deeper into that. So where you're looking at today, and I know you can't see a lot of the land. I live in New Market, Alabama, and I live just down the road from the site of the Quick airplane. Now, most people do not know about the Quick family airplane, which flew in 1908. It was one of the very first manned flights, one of the very first flights ever. We obviously remember Kitty Hawk, we remember the Wright brothers, but William Lafayette Quick wanted to build a device which would allow him to spray crops, right? In Alabama, we're very much agriculture. And he devised, he looked around, he saw birds, and he thought, what if I build a device where humans could be up in the air and spray crops quicker? Now, he would have beaten the Quicks had he not asked for a bigger engine. He had to order an engine from France that would allow him to take not only humans, but also the pesticides that he wanted to deliver on the crops. And so he ended up, instead of 1903, it was 5 years later. But we're just right down the road. There's a historical marker. The Quick family airplane was built and flew. They're actually my family. So yeah, I'm a Taylor, but I'm very much embedded with the Quick family. And the Quick family airplane has been in the Smithsonian. It is now at the Space and Rocket Center. So in the I forget what the name of the ballroom it is, but they have it. But anyway, the point is that my family has always been a part of human flight, and it just so happens that I'm part of human space flight.
You're from Huntsville, Alabama. Huntsville, Alabama. Am I correct? That's what you said on your website. I don't want to I'm probably being stereotypical, but like whenever you hear like Alabama and like I'm hearing like oh hillbillies, and like you kind of that you come from that, and like that's like I said, it's probably stereotypical, but like, do you think that kind of like affects the when you like with like just your work and like that, or do you think that like affected like just your creatives, like your book and whatnot?
So, it definitely is a very real thing. So, personally, I get to travel a whole lot. I've had a good career, and my family is, we've done well for us. So I get to go to Jamaica a lot. I get to travel for work. I get to go all across the country, and that's always something that comes up in conversation. Now, what I will say is that my experience with that has been, yes. So yeah, you're from Alabama. You're a bunch of moonshine sipping inbred hillbillies, right? That's how we get our name. But it's really uneducated because Huntsville in particular has the highest per capita PhD of any city on the planet. We're a melting pot. We always have been. You've got, not only is there Marshall Space Flight Center here, but Redstone Arsenal, which is where Project Paperclip was relocated, where NASA was essentially founded. And so we continue to have Space and Missile Defense Command. We have FBI here. And so it is one of the smartest, most culturally diverse cities in the country. But what's interesting is that's my experience, but I also have African-American friends. I also have Asian friends. And we always talk about that because all of us like to travel. We're very culturally minded, even though that I lived here my entire life. I'm born and raised in Alabama. And I don't know if you noticed this, I don't have an accent, right? And neither do most of my friends because we come from very highly educated people. And I understand that that's just a small portion of Alabama. But the point I was making is that my friends that are from other cultures, when they travel, they get asked the same questions. And it's really funny because we chat about that, about how offensive it is when we're sitting with folks at a bar or a restaurant, at a resort, whatever. And there's the insinuation made that, for example, one of my wife's best friends is an African-American, and they always ask her, well, do you feel safe? Is there still slavery? And and she can't stand it because she was like, if you knew anything about Huntsville, Alabama in particular, that is not a reality.
Do you find that you like hide it, or is it just kind of like you're just from there, you own it?
No, I'm incredibly proud of being from this city and from the state. It has a rich culture and rich heritage, and uh, we can't speak to things that have happened for 400 years before we were born. What we can speak to is how we conduct ourselves in our lives, and this city in particular, and all of North Alabama, from all the way from the Muscle Shoals, which the Rolling Stones produce records there. Muscle Shoals, which is in North Alabama, but it's on the west. It has a rich culture with music for all races and all cultures, and then you go all the way to the right, and we have Scottsboro, Alabama, and places like that. So no, it's not hiding it at all. I don't hide it. I'm incredibly proud to be from my state, especially to be from my city. We're the people that have put men in space. We put men and women around the moon at this point, thanks to Artemis 2. We're the propulsion capital of the world, and I'm incredibly proud to be from my state.
From Iowa, for anyone, I'm shouted out all the time, but even though like I'm not going to stay here forever, but like I always do, like whenever it's on TV, I'm like, hey, I'm from there. I do like, so I kind of agree. Like it's the same way for me, where like I'm basically like I'm the proud representative, like my home state, and like. Why do you but like with NASA in general, we'll get it more. I have more questions, of course, but like why do you want to why do you feel it's like worth sharing, like you're an engineer for them?
Well, there's one thing. So I actually have moved. I'm in a different role now at NASA as of about 3 weeks ago than I was the past 5 years, and then certainly the previous 13 years before that. But in my previous role that just ended, I managed a technician workforce, and they're all, quote unquote, blue collar guys. They're machinists, they're technicians. And one thing that I always told them was that, there are all these other jobs out there where you can make probably better money being a machinist in either the automotive industry. Huntsville has Toyota here. We have Polaris here as well. But once you come in, what I always tell them when they come on board with us, when they're looking for a job, I tell them, I said, this is a profession where when you experience human space flight and what NASA is about and what we stand for and the 7 standards that we have, it gets in your blood and it never leaves you. And it's interesting because kind of going back to your first question, I told you that I didn't want to work for NASA when I was a younger man. I wanted to forge my own path, right? I didn't want to be like my dad, which is folly because I love my father and he's an incredible man. He's an incredible NASA scientist. But I ended up working for NASA anyway, not because of him. I actually, when I was in college, I was on the staff with the University of Alabama, Huntsville, and I'd worked on a project for about 2 years following the Columbia disaster and returned to flight. And that gave me an opportunity to work for NASA. And at the time, I was married. I had a young child. And to be honest with you, for any folks that are out there wondering if GPAs matter in college, they do, because I didn't have a lot of opportunities when I graduated. I didn't have a great GPA. I had to work my way through college. I had to work multiple jobs through college just to kind of pay my own way. So, even though I talked about my family has a rich heritage, we've done very well for ourselves, I had to forge my own path. And my parents and my grandparents made that perfectly clear to me that you're on your own. So point is that NASA gave me an opportunity because of the work that I had done for them. And that was at the end of the space shuttle program, which the space shuttle was something that I idolized growing up. And once that gets into your blood, once you're a part of something like that is so complex, so risky, and so amazing, you just can't see yourself doing anything after that.
Still found it kind of like it was a cool opportunity that your grandfather and your dad, they work for NASA and stuff like that.
Yeah, it definitely was. Again, 1 year, for me, and not all of NASA works on the space station. Not all of NASA works for space shuttle. Not everybody works for the Artemis missions. There's all these other science and technology projects. But the thing is when you are a part of say the space shuttle program or part of the Artemis, and some aspect of that rocket or that vehicle has your name on it and you're responsible for that. And how incredibly complex and risky it is. And that there are people on that. And you watch that thing leave the mobile launch platform at pad 39A at the KSC and you watch it go up. You have something at stake inside you, right? Either personally or professionally. And that's something that not many people can say, right? So, space shuttle, the risk assessment was, if we lost we expected to lose 1 out of every 10 launches. That was the risk posture for space shuttle program. And, we only lost 2 shuttles, and it sucks, right? 1986 and 2003. We hate that we lost those 14 astronauts. But if you look at the scope of 138 flights and you only lost 2, that's an incredible feat, no matter how you look at it.
When you're looking back to, like, I'm assuming it was probably maybe the early 20s, like, do you remember when you first, like, joined, or, like, you start, like, that time when you first, like, started to, like, follow in your father's footsteps, and, like, you kind of took the first step of joining NASA, or what was the first program?
Yeah, so I'd probably started working for NASA for about 2 weeks, and I got shipped to Kennedy Space Center. One of the shuttle launches, so Pad 39A and B were built during the Apollo program, and they have a thing called the flame trench, which is a wall that is meant to direct the flames from the main engines out, right? And one of the shuttles blew an entire section of that brick wall off, and there was a lot of concern that some of those bricks might hit the ground and bounce back up into the orbiter main engines. And so I got sent down there, and I'm, at this point, I'm just a kid, right? And I'm just getting on board, and what could I possibly add as an engineer? And there was this moment where I walked into the flame trench, and there was a shuttle on the pad, and I have a picture somewhere on Facebook of me wearing a hard hat, looking up at the SSMEs, and realizing, like, I am standing in a spot where Apollo 11 launched, where 100 different shuttles have launched, and there was just this moment that was like, oh, this is what I meant to be.
So it was like, this was long enough ago where, like, Facebook was still, like, back on, like, the popularity of, like, the younger kids and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, this was so far ago that, like, my phone that I had at the time wouldn't even connect to Facebook. So I had to take a picture with my phone and then, like, email it to myself and then upload it on Facebook.
It's like early 2000s, I'm assuming, 90s?
Yeah, it was probably 2008. This was probably 2008. I had just graduated college. Again, like I said, I had to work my way through college. I had an internship at Teledyne Brown, so I worked one semester and then I went to school semester. So when I graduated, I was 25 years old, right? So I was actually 25. But, that actually worked out to my advantage. Again, being on your own, having to make your own way. I had to pay for all of my college. I had to pay for my house. Like, so yeah, when you've got to work 2 jobs and you got a family, sometimes things take a lot longer. And I think that that's important for our current generation, right? And I have a lot of and I talk about this a little bit in my book, Rockstar Echoes. It's one of the underlying themes of generational trauma and angst in particular, is because not everything that we've been sold, whether it's my generation or your generation, it doesn't happen that way, right? We think that we go check these boxes, and if we do these things, then we become successful. And that's simply not the way that the world operates. So for me, it was, hey, it wasn't so simple as being 18, going to college until I was 22, getting a job. No, I had to take a completely different path, but it made me who I am. I'm very proud of that. I would have loved to have gotten out of college with no debt, you know what I mean? But that wasn't reality. It took me a while to pay that off. But, I'm glad that I went that route.
With you mentioning, like, you were in college was at least 20, a little over 20 years ago, maybe 30, closer to that now. Like, you were, you just graduated college, and, like, you just went through this whole path of, like, it's not exactly the same as it is now. And, like, I was wondering, how do you, like, with you being in this, like, area for the longest time, how do you feel like it's, like, changed over the years? And, like, how do you feel about just life in general now that, like, it's coming up to 30 years that since the beginning of the decade?
Well, I can tell you that, financially, we're all feeling the pinch that, I've been very successful in my career and kind of making my way up, and the general pay scale for government employees being what it is. One of the things that most of us struggle with is that, and it's well understood across the nation, that wages haven't kept up with the cost of living. And that's really hard on government employees in particular. There's a misnomer that people believe that government workers have it made, that it's easy job. And it can be if you so choose, but it's like that in anywhere else in the world. You can make things as easy or as hard, and you can be as successful or as you want. But for some of us that are really high performers, one of the things that has been a struggle at NASA in particular, or any government agency, is that, if you go back and look at the GS pay scale from when I graduated college in 2008 and what somebody, that starts out for NASA working, at the time, a GS7 got paid $47,000 a year. If you go look right now, I think a GS7 might make 60 something $1,000 a year. So there's about a $20,000 difference for a fresh out of college employee. But if you look at the cost of living on what things cost, it hasn't kept up with that. And that extends even to people that are at my level, that, hey, we've been really successful. We're high grade participant or high grade employees. But like, it's definitely been struggling to, and you asked about the awards that I've won and stuff like that, life is still a struggle, even at 40, nearly 45 years old. It doesn't get any easier. A lot of us are just not where we hoped we would be at this point in time.
Because I just looked up what you a GS7 in 2026, and it says the pay range goes from 43K to 56K at step 2.
Wow. So that just proves my point. It's even worse than I thought, right? So almost 20 years later, a GS7, a fresh out of college kid, is only making about $10,000 more than I made nearly 20 years ago. So that's definitely been a struggle, and it hasn't gotten any better.
Like you stated, like it was a pretty decent time, but over the last 20 years, like, was it a good time? You kind of you kept that enjoyment, or was there a point where you're kind of deciding, should I keep this up? Should I leave? Because I believe you said your dad didn't want to do this anymore, right?
Well, so no, there have definitely been points where I've second guessed it. So my dad has always wanted to be at NASA and retire from NASA, and he actually has a retirement date set now. But no, for me, I definitely considered leaving. Following the space shuttle retirement in 2011, and we went to the Constellation program, which was then canceled. There was a very, for me personally, a dark period of time where, I had been working 5 or 6 years at that point after Space Shuttle, and nothing was happening. And I was starting to lose faith that I would be a part of something great. And so now here we are. I stuck with it, and we've had Artemis 1 successful unmanned, Artemis 2 successful and manned and womaned, I should add. And for the first time, we put a Canadian around the moon. And having been a big part of that mission in particular, I worked from the launch abort all the way down to the solid rockets. I've been a part of all those different parts. And being able to return humans around the moon, even though we're not where I hoped that we would be, right? If you would have asked me 15 years ago, where do you think NASA will be, or where do you want NASA to be? We're not where I want us to be, but I think all of us would agree, because we also have nothing to do with the budgets, right? We have nothing to do with the mission of the current administration. But what I can say is that there were times that I thought about leaving. I've interviewed at SpaceX multiple times. I've interviewed with Blue Origin. I've ultimately decided to stay at NASA. And I think, and I don't know what the future holds for me, but right now I'm very proud to be a part, because we're really doing some amazing things at NASA right now, which the public probably doesn't know about. But like, we're trying to go from one launch every 4 years, which we did between Artemis 1 and 2. And now we're trying to do 2 launches a year. And it's going to be tough. Very tough, but we are definitely working towards that end.
Usually, I tell my parents, hey, like, I'm interviewing this guy, or like just random conversation, and in my eyes, it's cool that you're like an engineer, but I'd imagine it's basically just day-to-day stuff for you. Like, do you think of yourself as like, oh, hey, you're just your average like NASA engineer, or do you find yourself like, I just kind of work for the NASA? Like, how do you see yourself? Do you understand my question?
I do. And I think, kind of going back to one of my answers earlier, I think that as with anything in life, it is what you make it. I've never looked at it that way. One of the things that I tell folks is that, at this point, NASA is truly a part of my identity. Even when I didn't want it to be a part of my identity, it was, because when I was 5 years old, I was going to work with my dad. We were mixing solid rocket propellant. I've been around it my entire life. And we all go through that period of our lives where we rebel kind of against what maybe we were meant to do. And, but like, no, I go to work every day, truly. There's some days that are rough, there's some days that you leave work and you think, what did I do today? But it's like that anywhere. But I've also been very fortunate in that, my career has been really interesting. I've been around so much flight hardware. That's what I do every single day. And not every engineer gets to do that. There are thermal analysts. There's vibrational analysts, there's acoustical analysts, there's all these different types of engineers, and I can't speak to them because I I don't do that, that their work is essentially on a computer and it's valuable. We have to have that. Now, that's not me. And I like to joke that, like, even though I have a master's in engineering and mechanical and aerospace engineering, I actually started my PhD during COVID. I don't feel like I'm a good engineer. I've never done a day of engineering in my life. Now, people always ask me, like, then how can you be good at what you do? And what I tell them is I've been fortunate to be around enough uh, flight hardware and how it's built, how it's tested, that, you learn, a whole lot. It's kind of like being a mechanic, that there are people that go to school for being a mechanic. The National Auto Diesel College, for example, is in Nashville. My best friend went there. You can learn to be a great mechanic. But there's something to be said for folks that grow up working on their dad's race car, or, their GTO or their Chevelle or whatever it is. And you learn so much about just being around that every day that it becomes that becomes your personality.
If you don't think you're like an engineer per se, what title would you give yourself if I have an idea?
Well, I would say, oh man, I probably would say a rocket mechanic, probably, because I've done three different things in my career. Essentially, non-destructive evaluation, which is using radiography, eddy current, ultrasound, phased array, a lot of different techniques to look at flight hardware during production and post-production to see if there's any cracks or flaws and things like that. And you have to do that during the manufacturing processes. So you understand exactly how a piece of a rocket is built. Then you understand why it was designed that way, right? You need these techniques because we don't build things like a bridge, right? A bridge in civil engineering, you can have a factor of safety of 1,000 and nobody cares. In rockets, it'll never get off the ground. So you have to have a way of buying down that risk and knowing that, like, we made this to the utmost perfection, right? We have a 1.04 factor of safety, which means if this thing survives one launch, it's done its job. So you have to use those techniques to make sure that that piece that you built has zero flaws in it. So that allowed me to see, like, all this flight hardware in different parts of manufacturing. And in some cases, after it was used, when it came back down from flight, looking at it again, deciding if we could reuse it. Now, that was one part of my career. The second part of my career was actually building that flight hardware. And I managed the largest fabrication shop at Marshall Space Flight Center. I had about 50 technicians and analysts and things like that worked for me. So, we were building this stuff. So I got to see how this piece started out as a raw stock of material that we bought from AMRO or whatever. We had to make sure that that material was exactly how we bought it. And then we had to manufacture it. It had to go through all these checkouts. So when I say rocket mechanic, I mean, I think that's pretty much who I am at this point, is like, just understanding how things are built and why, right? That's a big thing for me, and understanding how it fits in.
I saw that on Amazon when I was looking up at the summary. It's your book, Rockstar Echoes. It was released on January 13th, 2026. How many years have you been working on this? Because it seems like you're just now, it's like only been out maybe basically since the beginning of the year.
That's a really great question, because I actually want to be a science fiction writer. I'm a huge science fiction fan, obviously, right? There's so many of us in the world, even those that don't work for NASA. We all love science fiction in some way, because science fiction has a way of teaching us something about humanity, a lesson about humanity in the guise of something that may not be anything like about humanity, right? And I actually I started writing science fiction a long, long time ago, but the idea for Rockstar Echoes came to me from a couple of dreams in particular, and my love for performance art, specifically rock and roll, grunge, punk, classic rock. I'm fascinated with especially the 90s grunge movement because we lost all of these iconic frontmen to both suicide and addiction, and how tough it is to replace people like that. And so I had this idea for writing Rockstar Echoes, and it was about the time that Daisy Jones and the Six had come out, had become a show, and was becoming massive. And I realized that, like, I had a great story to tell. I had this fantastic idea that kind of came to me, and I said, well, I do want to write science fiction one day, but this is an idea that I think that is more mainstream, that I think that there's something I can say about generational trauma. There's something I can say about the commodification of women inside of rock and roll, and really as it pertains to women in any industry. And so that's why I decided to write it.
Was there like a point in time that you decided like you at least were interested in this? Because like it's like, I mean, sure, they sure, science fiction and like NASA, like, in the hindsight, like when you hear that, they're kind of the same. But like, why? When did you decide you wanted to be an author, and was this your first book?
So it was really so during COVID. COVID struck everybody differently, and we had to continue to work. Right, pretty much all of us are working from home,
Mhm.
and I really hated that. And so this is when I got my opportunity to change careers and start managing the Building 4705 Space Flight Fabrication Center. And when I first started that job, I had a little bit of time on my hands, right? So as I was learning that role, I had some time. So I'm sitting there alone in my office. There weren't a lot of people around, not a lot of distractions, as opposed to working from home. So I chose to go back to work. I did not want to work from home. That just I can't do that. But the flip side was I would be at work, there'd be nobody around. I could have watched Netflix, I could have done whatever, but I decided that I wanted to do something productive with my time, and I had this good idea. So it was probably 2020, 2021 when I first started writing. And then the idea for publishing actually came because my youngest son became a published author when he was, I think, in fifth grade. And I've always wanted to be a published author, but I didn't know how to do it. I didn't want to spend the time to like figure it out, whatever. But I watched him go through that process. He did it through his school and through some programs. And I decided, well, I love that my son beat me at doing something. Fathers should always want their sons to be better than themselves. But I said to myself, well, if Gavin can do it, then I can do it. So that's when I decided.
What's your son's book? And you said it was fifth grade, correct? Like, what's his?
That's right.
What's the novel's book?
Oh man, I think it was called Mission 13. I think was the name of it. I'd have to go check it out. It was he and a collaboration of a bunch of students from across North Alabama that worked together, and it was a little camp that they did, and then they had a published author work with them that walked them through the processes. So he just he played a small part in that, but his name was there, and he became a published author. So although his like what they were doing versus what I was doing. So I'm one of those people that when I decide to take on a new hobby, whatever it is, from bass fishing to sports cars to writing, I go in with both feet. So when I decided to do this, I knew that there were tons of people that write books and publish them, but they don't do it like professionally. They don't really go into it saying, I want to be renowned. I want to be competitive. Yeah, we all would like to make money. It's really not about that because especially an independent author like myself in a debut novel, you're not going to make money. You want to establish yourself as a legit author. You want to make a brand, and then you have to keep writing. And that's been the thing that's been the most not frustrating. It's not frustrating at all, but the most demanding thing is understanding that you can write an amazing book. And I think Echoes is a good book, but it's not going to stand alone on itself. Once you devote yourself to being an author, if you want to be a successful author, you've got to keep writing.
Of course, sometimes it's just it's about the I asked one person, one of my the guys I went to high school with. I had him on the show. He was a filmmaker back when I talked to him, but he said it's more about the creative. It's not about the making the money part. So I
Absolutely.
and I agree with that. Like sometimes you just want to do it for the gift. You don't want to just sell your soul. Are you not going to do any more of the contest or anything like that, or is it or is that going to be like a complete new start?
More of a hobby thing than it is a long-term career goal.
No, I get that. So you just want to do it more like for the fun part, but like but you're choosing like English, English and like because like your real thing.
I do that for the love of the game, and I do English teaching for both the love of the game and money.
Yeah, totally.
There's different ways of being successful, but one of the ways that being an independent author is a money game. You can, if you want to win awards, there's awards that you can pay money to get. If you want reviews, which everybody needs reviews in order to be successful, you can go pay thousands of dollars to get reviews. And you need all of these things to be successful, or you can kind of do what I was doing. And I said, you know what? I believe that we live in a merit-based society, whether or not that's true or not. And I believe if I write a good book and I go do podcasts like this or YouTube videos and I continue to work on it, it may not be successful right now, but if I dedicate myself to that, then over a long enough period of time, then eventually it will work.
Are you going to make any more books, or are you kind of just in that steady stone of like, the first one's out, let's just let it breathe?
No, I've absolutely been working on follow-on books. My next book, Rockstar Mirrors, Mirrors is about 98% of the way done. I've been working on it for about really since the day that Echoes was done. Actually, so as I've told some people, Echoes and Mirrors used to be one book, and I split them because, as a whole, it wasn't a good enough book. I split them and then evolved Echoes into what it became, and then Mirrors became its own thing, and it's very, very close to being done. That being said, I'm not in a huge rush because I spent a lot of money on my cover design. Is a great cover. It costs money. The interior design, great interior design. It costs money. All these things cost money, and I'm not gonna. I don't want to spend a ton of my money. I want Echoes to kind of make some of that money back for me, which it's been doing. I want to be fiscally responsible, right? So, I'm kind of waiting to be able to publish Mirrors. I don't want to publish it really in the same year. But so probably next year is when it's going to come out. I have a lot of other great ideas that I've actually started working on. My ideas to just keep writing. This is going to be a hobby. It's going to be something that you can do for the rest of your life. So, I love athletics, right? I love playing softball. I love playing football. But, athletics are one of those things is that as you get older, you just can't do those anymore. But writing is something that can be your hobby for the rest of your life. So this is something that I'm looking at saying, hey, this is something I want to do forever.
What's the cause of the title? Like, why Rockstar Echoes?
Well, I'll tell you, Rockstar was the original name for just the book when it was just one book. And it was generic. It was a placeholder at the time. But as I developed the characters in particular, the book was originally about Klein Thomas and just about him and his story of being just some guy that was a cover band singer from North Alabama that becomes the frontman for an iconic band, and the story between the link between he and Lloyd Brannon. And then as I developed Rain Harlow in particular, and she kind of took center stage, and I realized that she was the rock star. Then I started writing the follow-on books, and more characters were developed, and they had their own arcs, right? We all love where, you develop, whether it's science fiction, whether it's fantasy, whatever. We all love when a minor character gets their own arc. And I realized Rockstar was a great name because I could create a universe where everybody is a rock star and nobody is the rock star. So what started out as a generic name ended up being the perfect title. Now, Echoes in particular is because, Klein Thomas's voice is an echo of Lloyd Brannon's. Lloyd Brannon is dead. Klein never met Lloyd Brannon, and yet they share so many similarities with their musical background and their voice, and yet they're nothing like one another. So that's where I came up with that title.
Some legacies are inherited, some are stolen, and some are set on fire. What does that mean exactly?
Well, I don't want to spoil it for our readers because it's something that you're going to have to learn over the course of the entire series. But I'll kind of talk a little bit about that. Klein Thomas is going to embody all of those different things, right? So being some guy that falls out of the sky and replaces Lloyd Brannon, he's going to ultimately steal Lloyd's legacy because he's going to take Aberdeen in a completely different direction than Lloyd would have ever gone. Set on Fire is really a homage to a future book called Everything on Fire, which is about 3 books down the line. And it's the story of Rain Harlow and Klein Thomas both, where they realize is that when you're a part of a legacy, you really have no legacy at all. And sometimes you have to burn things to the ground in order to build something new, something that is truly yours and only yours. Especially in North Alabama, living kind of in the woods and stuff, there's plenty of afternoons where all you could do was sit around and listen to music. And when you're with your friends, right, at the time, Huntsville was a really, really small town. There wasn't a lot to do. So we did a lot of driving around when I was a teenager in particular. And so what do you do when you ride around? You listen to, CDs back in the day, right? We had CDs. We had these big cases. And music has always been a part of my life. My dad was in a bluegrass band growing up. I played cello in the Huntsville Metropolitan Youth Orchestra. It was a big part of my childhood. Music has always been a part of my childhood. But then as an adult, especially when we had COVID, so during COVID, there were no shows anymore. And me and my wife made a deal with one another that if COVID ever ended, because, there were some of us that thought that the world was going to end, and we certainly all knew that the world would never be the same afterwards, that I would never let something get in the way between me and seeing my heroes. Ironically, all of my heroes, essentially, most of them were already dead, right? So Kurt Cobain dies in 1994, kills himself. Scott Weiland dies, I think, or I forget when Scott died, but, Lane Staley from Alice in Chains died in 2002. Chris Cornell died in 2017. I never saw any of my favorite artists. They all died before I was basically an adult and could afford to go see them, right? And so all I had of their music is what I heard on the radio, and I never got to see them. Now, luckily for us, I've gotten to see some of my heroes, like Brandon Boyd and the band Incubus, and I've gotten to see Alice in Chains and Stone Temple Pilots, albeit with different frontmen. But that was also the impetus for writing Rockstar Echoes, was how unfairly frontmen are judged that replace an icon. So yeah, no, it's always been a huge part of my life. It still is. I'm wearing my Stone Temple Pilots shirt right now.
Where do you think you came up with like your character stories?
Oh.
Was it like from like a personal point? Because I know some like authors will like, you know, they kind of take it from themselves, like maybe their childhood, or like they just take it off like basically a self insert, but not self, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. No, I borrowed for Klein. I mean, I built Klein off myself. I just basically pretended, what if I had a great voice, and what if I got the opportunity to replace an iconic frontman? And then I sprinkled in parts of Chris Cornell, Scott Weiland, and Lane Staley. I looked at Klein and said, what if he had Chris Cornell's voice? What if he had Lane Staley's soul? And what if he moved on stage like and command an audience like Scott Weiland did? So I definitely borrowed from them, no doubt.
So they're mainly just like basically the characters are just like what ifs, like you're just kind of playing it pretend practically.
Practically, that's what I loved about it. That's why I started writing it. I wanted to explore that world, a world that I would never get to be a part of, but I could experience it by writing it.
Let's talk a little bit about your some of your awards. You told me that you won a few awards when we were first talking, and like according to NASA, you've from the one of them, you were put out the 1% of engineers. So you said you don't really feel like you're an engineer. Do you still think it's like a big achievement from like, do you think it's still a big achievement to earning that, even if you don't really feel like you've done your job correctly?
Well, I definitely did my job correctly, no doubt about that. The Silver Snoopy in particular, that award was less about, for me, I think one of the reasons I got it was because I didn't really think about it from an engineer perspective. I thought about it as someone that loves NASA and what we stand for, which is, the mission, right? And there was a particular issue with the solid rocket boosters in about 2015, and I bird dogged that for NASA, and I took it personally because solid rocket motors were my dad's life. That's what my dad has worked on his entire career, and I wanted to see that be successful, right? I grew up with it, and yeah. So I mean, it's 1% of engineers, but engineering has much more to do with what's on paper. It's more, about applying analytical thought, and also being willing to speak out when things are tough, when you know that you're going to get pushback from people, and not taking the easy road, which has never been my way. I've never been one to take the easy road. I've always taken the hard road, even to my own detriment, a lot. So it was a lot. What I will say is that the Silver Snoopy in particular is a lifetime achievement award. There, again, you said it, 1% of NASA, and it's not just engineers, it's NASA employees, but only 1% of us get it. And I got it fairly early on in my career, and I'm very fortunate, and I love that. I got the nice big plaque of it in my wall, but I also look at it every day and say, I did that, and I did a great job. I'm very proud of it. I can do more, and I strive every day to be one of the very, very, very few that have won two. In fact, there's only one person that we know of that has won two Silver Snoopy awards, and I want to do that. So I don't focus on I'm very proud of my achievements, whether it's the Center Director's Commendation, the Program Manager's Commendation for SLS or Space Shuttle or Space Station, which I've gotten all of those as well. I look at the next thing. I'm looking forward to the next challenge. What an award is for what's happened in the past. I want to continue to represent NASA in the future.
And what is that? You say you look forward to the next thing. Do you have anything in mind?
Well, right now, it's going to a launch cadence where we have 2 launches a year, and NASA has not done that since the 70s. And building core stages in particular, the SLS core stage is a wonderfully complex piece of equipment, right? And I know we get asked a lot by the public, well, why don't you just adopt the SpaceX mantra or the Blue Origin mantra, for reuse and rapid reuse, rapid manufacturing. And the thing is that while those rockets and the people that work on them are incredible, what they do is incredible. It's not core stage, right? SLS is meant to get us to beyond low Earth orbit. It's meant to get us to the moon. It's meant to get us to Mars. It is a wonderfully complex vehicle which means that it is a lot harder to build. Now you introduce building them faster than we've ever built anything, and trying to do 2 launches a year. That is a huge challenge, and all of us are working together. It's not just that. There's all of us across the board that are trying to figure out ways. So that's my current challenge right now: is how does my knowledge, even though I'm just one person and I'm very, very small, how do I get in every day and every day try to come up with an activity that helps us be safe, but also achieve that mission, which is actually what my current role is that I just moved into. My job right now is to work with Boeing, to work with our suppliers and figure out ways of shaving days, shaving weeks, shaving months off this production schedule while maintaining the safety so that we can meet the administration's goals.
Guys, welcome to the Tired Granolla Bar Podcast, or I guess goodbye at this point. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode with Zachary Taylor. I'm looking to have him back on maybe in the next year or so, couple months. If he has something else, like I told him in private, if he has something else he wants to promote, he's more than welcome to come on. But I hope you guys like the show. We post every Wednesday. Right now, I will admit we're in a little bit of a low zone of episodes, so it could be at least a week or two. Just it could be a while. That's basically what I'm saying. I'm trying to find more guests, and I'm gonna try to basically ramp it up to like at least another good 2 or 3 episodes. But if you guys want to come on, my email is in my YouTube bio. You can. I'm always looking for musicians. I'm looking for people with a story. That's my main thing. Just if you have something, a story you want to pitch me, my email is Ronnoc, RONNOC 123321 @gmail.com. My socials are always in the description as well, such as his. But you can find me on Instagram. You can find me on my personal YouTube where I do short films. You can find me. I have a personal TikTok where I just give a shit, and then I have a TikTok for the show. I officially made a TikTok show, but only for like the funny bits, like basically what I like to call the blooper moments. I don't know. If you guys want to find them, go check it out. All right, but anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you when I see you later.